Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I worked in human resources for 5 years at a mid-sized tech company. Most days I enjoy my job helping employees with benefits, resolving workplace conflicts, and making sure everyone follows company policies. I document everything carefully. That habit would save me from a big headache. Last month I got a call that showed the problems in our management. My phone rang around 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I answered with my standard HR greeting asking how I could help. The caller was one of our software developers who had been with the company for about 3 years. The employee told me they needed to talk about something urgent and private about the medical accommodation request they sent last week. I checked their file on my computer. This employee had asked for a specific workplace accommodation for a medical condition. Unfortunately, their request was in a gray area our company policies didn't cover, and it would have made us break certain industry rules. I told the employee that I had checked their request but couldn't approve the accommodation because of legal rules that stopped us from making these changes. The employee understood but was firm. They knew I was doing my job but said the accommodation was medically necessary and their doctor had given all the paperwork. They needed to talk to my supervisor, and if it wasn't fixed properly, they might take legal action, though they didn't want to. Their tone wasn't angry, just determined. I could hear the frustration and need in their voice. I asked them to hold while I talked to my manager. I walked to my supervisor's office and explained the situation. She was looking at her phone and barely looked up. My supervisor told me she was busy with quarterly reports and couldn't take the call. She told me to have the employee email their concerns with her copied, saying she would check it when she had time. I went back to my desk and picked up the call. I told the employee my supervisor couldn't take their call then, but wanted them to email their concerns with her copied, so she could review their case personally. I added that she had more power to make exceptions than I did. The employee said they would send the email right away and hoped we could fix this without more problems. After the call, I wrote an email to my supervisor, explaining the situation, the legal issues, and that the employee might take legal action if we couldn't find a solution. I sent it and hoped my supervisor would handle it well. A week passed with no answer. The employee sent 2 follow-up emails asking for updates, which I forwarded to my supervisor with notes about how urgent it was. Finally, my supervisor answered the email thread, including the employee. She just called me by my title saying I should handle this and keep her updated. That was it. No guidance, no talk about the legal issues I'd mentioned. She just waited a week and then sent it back to me. I was angry. I sent her a private email right away. I reminded her that this situation had potential legal problems, needing her authority. I pointed out that she had agreed to handle this when I first brought it to her. I stressed that the employee was threatening legal action, and I had already explained that I couldn't approve their request because of rules. She answered within minutes. She said handling employee accommodation requests was my job. She said she didn't have time for every employee complaint and never agreed to handle this personally, only to review it. She said she had reviewed it, and now I needed to handle it by telling them we couldn't do it and moving on. I looked at her email. This was exactly when we needed management to step in, and she was avoiding responsibility. With no choice left, I called the employee back. I told the employee I had reviewed their case again with management, but we still couldn't approve the accommodation because of the rules I mentioned earlier. I said I understood this was hard news, but there was no other path in our company structure. The employee said they were disappointed, reminding me they had been loyal for 3 years and needed this accommodation to keep working well. They would talk to their attorney about what to do next, though they wished it didn't have to happen. 3 weeks later, our company got sued for failing to provide reasonable accommodations under disability protection laws. The legal document went to our chief people officer, who called an emergency meeting with the president of the company. I was called to explain the situation, and I brought all my documentation, the original emails, my supervisor's refusal to handle it, and my notes from talks with the employee where I had clearly shown the risk of legal action. The chief people officer was angry, not at me, but at my supervisor. The CPO asked why this wasn't fixed without legal involvement and why it wasn't properly escalated. My supervisor tried to say she never got the full information and that I hadn't told her how serious it was. That's when I showed the email thread proving I had done exactly that many times. The meeting ended with my supervisor being removed from management. She wasn't fired but was demoted to a non-supervisory role, and I was assigned to a different manager. The company settled with the employee, giving them the accommodation they had asked for in the first place. I've been a repo man for about 7 years now. Most people think we enjoy taking people's cars, but truthfully, it's just a job. I don't make the rules about who pays their loans and who doesn't. I'm just the guy who has to deal with the fallout. This Tuesday started like any other. My dispatcher called me around 6 a.m. with a repossession order for a red BMW 3 Series, 3 months behind on payments. The address was in one of those upper middle class neighborhoods where everyone thinks they're too important to follow rules. I'd been to this address twice before. The first time, no one was home. The second time, about a week ago, I was greeted by a woman who started screaming at me that I had no right to be there and that she'd already worked something out with the bank. I called it in while she was still yelling. The bank confirmed they had no payment arrangement with her and the repo order was still active. When I told her this, she slammed the door in my face. I couldn't get the car that day because it was locked in her garage. But today was different. When I pulled onto her street around 7 a.m., I spotted the red BMW parked in the driveway. Perfect timing. I backed my tow truck up, got out, and started hooking up the car as quickly and quietly as possible. I was almost finished when I heard the front door slam open. The woman came storming out, yelling and demanding to know what I thought I was doing with her car. I didn't look up, just kept securing the chains. I explained that her vehicle was being repossessed due to non-payment and that I had all the paperwork if she wanted to see it. She screamed that she didn't care about my paperwork and insisted she had worked something out with the bank the previous week. I told her the bank had confirmed they had no arrangement with her, that the car was being repossessed, and she would need to contact her lender to resolve the issue. She walked over to me, getting right in my face. Her breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. She demanded to know if I knew who she was, bragging that her husband was a very important businessman and claiming they were just having a temporary cash flow issue. I said this wasn't my decision. I was just doing my job. She called my job harassment of innocent people and theft of their property. I finished securing the car and started walking back to the driver's side of my tow truck. She followed me, screaming the whole way about how she needed her car for work and demanding to know how she was supposed to get anywhere. I again suggested she talk to her lender about that. I climbed into my truck and closed the door, but she kept banging on the window. I started the engine, hoping she'd back off, but instead, she ran around to the passenger side. Before I could lock it, she yanked open the door and jumped in, shouting that I wasn't leaving with her car. I told her she needed to get out of my truck immediately because she was trespassing in a company vehicle. She refused, saying she wasn't going anywhere until I unhooked her car. I reached for my phone to call the police, but in that split second, she lunged across me and grabbed the steering wheel. I tried to push her back, but she was surprisingly strong. In the struggle, she managed to shift the truck into gear, and when I took my foot off the brake, the truck lurched forward. I yelled at her to stop and asked what she was doing. She shoved me hard enough that I fell sideways against the door. Before I could recover, she had climbed over into the driver's seat, sitting on top of me. I tried to regain control, but she hit the gas pedal hard, and the truck shot forward, dragging the BMW behind it. I shouted at her, asking if she was crazy and telling her to stop the truck. She screamed at me to get out while elbowing me in the ribs, causing me to lose my grip. She pushed me far enough away from the controls that she had full command of the vehicle. The truck was speeding down the residential street now, the BMW bouncing behind us. I made one more grab for the wheel, but she slammed on the brakes so suddenly that I was thrown forward, hitting my head on the dashboard. By the time I regained my senses, she had shoved me out of the driver's seat completely. I warned her that she needed to stop the truck before someone got hurt. She just yelled at me to shut up and get out. She was driving erratically, swerving across the road. I could hear the sound of metal scraping on asphalt as the BMW was dragged along, still only partially secured to the tow truck. She took a corner too fast and I heard a crunch as the back end of the BMW slammed into a parked car. I urged her to pull over, pointing out that she was destroying both her own car and my truck. She blamed me, claiming that if I had just left her alone, none of this would be happening. We were approaching a major intersection, and I could see the light was red. There were cars stopped in all directions. I braced myself against the dashboard and warned her about the red light, telling her she needed to stop. She didn't slow down. Instead, she accelerated, honking the horn. I closed my eyes. There was a crash followed by the sound of breaking glass and twisting metal. When I opened my eyes, we had T-boned another vehicle. The airbags had deployed and the woman was slumped against the steering wheel. I was dazed but conscious. I looked out the windshield and saw flashing lights. By some miracle, there had been a police car waiting at that intersection. 2 officers were already running toward us. It took about 15 minutes for them to get me out of the passenger side and for paramedics to check me over. I had a bump on my head and some bruised ribs, but nothing was broken. The woman wasn't seriously injured either, though she was still screaming, now at the police officers instead of me. The woman was accusing me of trying to steal her car and attacking her, insisting that this whole situation was my fault. One of the officers pointed out that they had watched her run a red light in a stolen tow truck. She denied that it was stolen, claiming she was defending her property because I was stealing her car. The officers looked at me. I explained that I was a repossession agent who was legally repossessing her vehicle when she jumped in my truck and took control of it. I showed them my credentials and the repo order. They nodded and turned back to her. The officer told her that she was under arrest for vehicle theft, reckless endangerment, assault, and running a red light. She became more irate, demanding to know if they knew who her husband was, and insisting they couldn't arrest her. The officers handcuffed her and read her rights, while she continued to scream about how important she was and how this was all a big misunderstanding. As they put her in the back of the police car, I felt satisfied. Her car was now totaled, my tow truck had damage, and she was facing criminal charges. All of that to avoid paying her car loan. The next day, my boss called to tell me that the woman's husband had come to the bank and paid off the entire loan plus damages to the tow truck. He'd had no idea she hadn't been making the car payments. He apologized for his wife's behavior and asked that no further action be taken. But it was too late for that. Last I heard, she was facing multiple felony charges and looking at jail time. This happened about 15 years ago, so my memory is a bit fuzzy on the exact details, but I'll try to recall it as best I can. When I was around 10 years old, I was in a terrible accident involving a school bus. I won't get into the gruesome parts, but I ended up needing 27 stitches in my right leg and 5 in my left foot. It was pretty bad. After initial treatment, my pediatrician recommended me to a plastic surgeon who I started seeing regularly. I'm not sure if plastic surgeons specialize or if they can do many different things, but I was seeing this doctor for wound treatment, possible reconstruction, and maybe skin grafting if needed. The appointment I'm going to tell you about was one of my later ones. By this point, all my stitches had been removed, and I could walk without crutches, though I still had this weird limp since my right leg hadn't been used much for months. I was sitting in the waiting room with my mother, just waiting to be called in. That's when this woman walked in. She was probably in her late 20s or early 30s from what I remember. When she saw me, she made this face, a mixture of surprise and disgust. When I was younger, I thought maybe she was grossed out because I had dog hair or food stains on my clothes. But now that I'm an adult, I think she assumed my mother was forcing me to get cosmetic surgery as a child. She couldn't see my bandages because I was wearing long pants. I remember her staring at me as she sat down, then occasionally looking over while I tried to distract myself by looking at brochures for breast reduction. None of it made any sense to my child brain, but it was something to look at. Eventually, I went in for my appointment. The doctor put a new bandage on my wound, and rewrapped it in my old blood-stained compression wrap. Then we left the examination room, and my mother stayed to schedule my next appointment. She went to use the restroom by the front door, leaving me alone in the waiting room for a moment. The woman from earlier was standing in the middle of the waiting room for some reason. As I walked past her, she stopped me and rudely asked what a kid like me needed plastic surgery for. I didn't respond. I was shy and still processing trauma that my child mind couldn't fully comprehend. Any thought of the accident would bring back vivid, terrifying details. I tried to keep walking past her, but she blocked me from getting to the seat I was heading for. She scolded me about my manners, saying I should answer when an adult asks a question. I struggled to say anything to her, but I was used to people wanting to see my leg by then. For months, I've been showing my bandages to relatives and doctors, so I just defaulted to doing that. I got down on one knee and pulled up my pant leg to show the blood-stained compression bandage. In a shaky voice, I tried to explain that I had been in an accident. My words came out broken and stuttered as I started to break down. I didn't look up at her face, but I can only imagine what she thought as she realized I wasn't a child coming for a touch-up, but getting my mangled leg repaired. I stood back up and started crying right there in the middle of the waiting room. My vision went blurry with tears as I tried my best not to wail out loud. That's when my mother came back, rushing over to me as I cried. She gently asked what had happened. The woman quickly walked away, loudly claiming she hadn't done anything wrong, as she retreated to her corner. My mom didn't even acknowledge her. She just helped me back to our car. And like fixing any kind of childhood trauma, ice cream turned my tears into smiles. My mother bought me the biggest sundae I'd ever seen. In the car, my mom told me not to let people like that woman bother me. She said, "They don't understand what I've been through." When I asked why the woman was so mean and why she questioned me, my mother said some people think everything is about them. They make judgments without knowing the full story. Then my mom told me that I was braver than that woman would ever be, pointing out how much I had already overcome. On the bright side, I didn't end up needing any reconstruction, and I decided to keep my scar. I made a full recovery and regained complete functionality in my leg. Sometimes I catch people staring at the scar when I wear shorts, but now I just smile as a reminder of how strong I was, even at 10 years old. The next time I went to that plastic surgeon's office, the woman wasn't there, but the receptionist, who had witnessed the whole thing, gave me a special sticker and told me I was her bravest patient. After my mother and I left, the doctor had come out and told the woman that her behavior was unacceptable, especially toward a child who was recovering from trauma. According to the receptionist, the woman was asked to find another doctor for her cosmetic needs. I was quiet in school. Good grades, head down, do the work. That approach got me through high school and into one of the best computer science programs in the state. My first year at university was going smoothly until the group project for programming fundamentals was announced. Professor Mitchell told us this would count for 40% of our final grade and would require both coding skills and presentation abilities. I wasn't worried about the coding part, but public speaking made my palms sweat. When the professor announced we could choose our partners, I hesitated too long. By the time I looked up, the room was chaotic with people pairing up. That's how I ended up with my partner, the only other person left without a team. He seemed nice at first. Dressed in expensive clothes with the latest laptop, he seemed confident. I thought maybe I'd lucked out, perhaps. He was secretly brilliant. I was wrong. Our first meeting at the library set the tone for the entire project. I suggested dividing the work, proposing that he could handle the user interface while I worked on the back-end functionality. He barely looked up from his phone, just casually agreeing to whatever I thought was best. I asked if he had reviewed the project requirements about creating a functional inventory management system. He said he hadn't yet, but claimed he would check it out that night. He never did. For the next 3 weeks, it was a struggle. I'd send him messages, create detailed task lists, even offered to meet up and help him understand the code. His responses were always variations of the same excuses. He would tell me he'd do it later because he was busy with other classes. I reminded him we only had 2 weeks left and explained that I really needed his part to integrate with mine. He would complain that He didn't understand the material and point out that I was better at programming than he was. After my fifth unanswered message, I realized I had two choices: fail the project or do it all myself. I chose the latter. For 10 straight days, I barely slept. I built the entire system, documented everything, and even prepared a presentation script for both of us. I sent him his part, highlighted, asking him to review it. He promised he would. The day of the presentation arrived. I spotted him outside the classroom, chatting with a girl I assumed was his girlfriend. I asked if he had reviewed the script. He dismissed my concerns, saying it looked good and telling me not to worry. I pressed him on whether he understood his part, specifically the introduction and conclusion. He brushed it off, saying it was just an intro and couldn't be that difficult. He boasted about being great at presentations. When our turn came, just as I was about to step forward, he jumped in front of me. As he rushed ahead, he told me he would do everything and that I should just enjoy it. Before I could object, he was already at the podium connecting his laptop. I stood frozen watching this train wreck about to unfold. He greeted the professors shakily and tried to present our solution, stumbling over his words and clearly not understanding what he was talking about. He clicked through slides I prepared, misrepresenting the architecture and making ridiculous claims about using CSS frameworks for database optimization. Professor Davis questioned him, pointing out that CSS isn't used for database optimization. He fumbled through a response about algorithms, clearly having no idea what he was talking about. Professor Williams pressed him further, asking for specifics. He pointed at random functions and made up explanations that were wrong and sometimes impossible in computing terms. Finally, Professor Mitchell turned to me and asked if I could explain. I stepped forward and gave a clear explanation of our project. For 15 minutes, I walked through the architecture, explained the real algorithms, and demonstrated the functionality. I answered their technical questions with precision. The contrast was stark. By the time I finished, the professors were nodding. After we returned to our seats, I caught a glimpse of his girlfriend's face. She was staring at him like he'd transformed into a different species. The following week, I received a 98% with comments praising the technical excellence. He received a 60%, the minimum passing grade, plus penalty assignments and a note about academic integrity. Professor Mitchell called him for a special meeting that everyone knew about because she announced it right after class. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't have to. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.